Hello everyone, this is Ms.S.Selvi presenting the poem My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. Robert Browning was an English poet and playwright. His dramatic monologues put him high among the Victorian poets. He was noted for his irony, characterization, dark humor, social commentary, and historical settings. Robert Browning was born in Camberwell, London on May 7, 1812. He inherited the literary ability and literary taste from his father. At the age of 17, he went to University College, London, for the study of Greek. He was privately educated and had enough money to travel and write poetry. His first poem, Pauline, appeared in 1883. That was followed by Paracelsus in 1835. The Ring and the Book, his longest poem, was followed by a number of volumes in the succeeding years. Asalando, his last poem, appeared in 1889 and it was published on the day of his death. My Last Duchess. It's a dramatic monologue. This means that it is a dramatic piece that has been written for a single actor. In fact, it is a long play by itself. In a dramatic monologue, the speaker is not the poet, but a character that the poet has created in the poem. The poet lets the character speak for himself, and the reader is left to draw his own conclusions about the character. Now, let us see the poem My Last Duchess. That's my last duchess, painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder. Now, Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. In the poem My Last Duchess, the Duke shows his visitor the painting of his dead wife, the last Duchess. Frau Pandolf is the painter of this portrait. The Duke is addressing the envoy of a count whose daughter he is going to marry. So he draws his attention to the portrait done by Friar Pandolf. The name of the painter is an imaginary one that Browning has invented. The Duke calls the painting a wonderful one in the third line, but he has used the word now. Why he has used the word now? You can also notice the strangeness of lines 4 and 5. He has said that Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day. The Duke could have used the word painted, but instead he has used the word worked busily. That could mean anything. Now I am reading from line 5. Will it please you sit and look at her? I said. Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. Now I am explaining lines 5 to 10. The Duke says that all those who saw the picture turned around as if to ask him why the Duchess had such a serious and passionate look on her face. The Duke also adds that he mentioned the painter's name by design, and he also says that nobody actually dared to ask him, but he believes they might do so. We can also notice lines 9 and 10 where the Duke makes it clear that he alone can draw the curtain covering the portrait. So the poet means that often people observing the expression of passion on the Duchess' face were suspicious of an affair between her and the painter, but the painter's name would remove all suspicion. He was also particular that no one but he drew the curtain to display the portrait. Yes, now I am reading from line number 11. And seemed as they would ask me if they dust how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus, Sir, it was not her husband's presence only called that spark of joy into the Duchess' cheek, perhaps. Frau Pandulf chanced to say, her mantle lamps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flesh that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cost enough for calling up that part of joy. Now I am explaining these lines. He says that it was obvious to anyone that the look on her countenance was caused by something more than the mere presence of her husband in that studio. The joy was so clear and bright. According to him, anything could delight the Duchess or make her blush, even small remarks made by the painter. He might have suggested that her mantle should not cover her wrist so much, or that it was impossible to reproduce on canvas the faint, and so on. In her case, even such a formal, courteous remark was sufficient to call forth a blush of happiness. Now I am reading from line number 21. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, it was all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bow of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, white mule, so rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked. The Duke continues with his criticism of the Duchess. He says that she had an innocent, happy nature that could be pleased easily. Her earnest, impassioned, and yet smiling glance went alike to everyone. She knew no distinction of things or persons. Everything pleased her. Everyone could arouse her gratitude. The same smile lighted her face when he, her husband, showed her a special favor, as when some overzealous fool plucked a branch of the cherry tree, rich with leaves and fruits, and presented it to her. For simple things like the bright sky at sunset or the white mule she rode, she showed her gratitude. But the Duke, who had a mind incapable of appreciating such unselfish joy, here speaks of it with implied contempt. Now I am reading the next 10 lines and I am explaining it. My gift of a 900-year-old name with anybody's gift. Who had stooped to blame this sort of trifling, even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you discuss me. Here you miss or there exceed the mark, and if she let herself be lessened so, nor plainly said her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. O sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. Now, let me explain these lines, what I read just now. Um, Now we can clearly understand that why the Duke is so angry on the Duchess, because the Duchess does not consider his 900-year-old name as being anything special. She considers everything the same, and she knew no distinction of things or persons. Everything pleased her. In fact, her behavior is so silly, according to the Duke, that he does not even lower himself to the level of scolding her. The Duke considers it below his dignity to show the Duchess where or how her behavior made him angry. So his anger turned soon to disgust. It was beneath his dignity to complain about such things. These are the feelings he had it in his mind, and at the same time, he had the feel that he could have corrected her, and perhaps she would have submitted willingly to his wishes, but this would have meant lowering himself from his wonted dignity. Now we can notice the word lessened in line 40, that is identical in sound with lessened, Lessenned. He says that such stooping was beyond him. So from these lines we could understand the supreme egotism of the Duke. He was very conscious of his superiority, that he could never realize that his Duchess had a mind and heart far above his. Now I am reading and explaining the last 15 sentences. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Will it please you rise? We will meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I vowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we will go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though taming a sea horse, thought a rarity, which claws of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Yes, now let us move on to the explanation. The Duke says, the Duchess smiled at the Duke, but that was not enough for him because she smiled at everyone anyway. The lines 45 and 46 are spoken abruptly. We can also notice the 2 and 3 word sentences and the repeated semicolons. We can also notice the Duke does not make clear what commands he gave and how the smiles of the Duchess stopped together. It is for the reader to conclude that the commands led to the death of the Duchess. The Duke now makes it clear that he is seeking another wife and the visitor has come to negotiate the marriage. His marriage is to be with somebody rich and he is sure to ask for much dowry, although he says that he is interested only in the lady he wants to marry. With that, he turned to move down with his guest. As a gesture of carelessness, he intended to suggest his indifference to such things. He pointed in passing to a rare statue in bronze, the figure of Neptune taming his sea horse. Claus of Innsbruck is again an imaginary sculptor. His speech reveals both the character of the Duchess and his own. The poet does not comment at all. What is exciting about this poem is how much we can find out about the Duke as he speaks and the story of the woman who was married to him. The poet turns every reader into a detective looking for clues, turning every line inside out for what it reveals.